This is Ivana Pagan's game production class. It's looking a little thin. There might be some stragglers who don't care. So when you're using the information that you're getting here in game production, you can be all smug about it. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Professor Kenneth Morrison. I was a gameplay animator in the industry before I came to UCF. I was at Blind Squirrel Games, Tell Big Tales. I'm wearing the colors, wearing my old logo tee with the hat, all of that. But we're here to talk about game animation. Reason why I'm doing this is because this program does not have a robust animation class to it. A lot of it is you just have to figure it out as you go, self-directed, which isn't the best. But it's very important for all of you people who are doing the production of a game, the design of a game, or just animators who are trying to figure something out to know what I'm going to be talking about here. This is all about game animation when it comes to, I'm going to snooze that, when it comes to production and design. So, why animation? So animation is the action of creating motion out of something that cannot move. Still images, clay figures, ink and paint, or in the case of video games, pixels and polygons. So animation pulls many, many, many duties when it comes to video games. Sometimes it's just breathing life into something. Sometimes it's a core conceit about a design or about a piece of art. So, and one of those things I say, providing feedback, gameplay feedback to player inputs and actions. So, hey, player wants to know that they're doing something, use animation to let them know that they're doing something, what they're doing is good, all that jazz. Good website to look at. I like fighting games. There's this website called Zwifus. I have it in here. I gave Professor Pagan the link to this this PowerPoint, so it should have this in here. It is essentially a sprite viewer for Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, so you're going to see a lot of Street Fighter animations here. They're very good animations. If you like animation, please look at that, and you'll find all the little hidden juicy goodness that Capcom in the 90s animation had to offer. But the 12 principles of animation. Oh, damn it. Squash and stretch, anticipation, staging, pose to pose, slow in, slow out, arcs, follow through, overlapping action, secondary action, appeal, timing, exaggeration, solid drawing. Has anyone heard of these before? Who here has not? Okay. You're going to have to get familiar with these. They're essentially going to be the vocabulary words that you use to critique animation. It's like, oh, the anticipation is off. Oh, you're trying to do some squash and stretch here. I don't understand the arcs. All of that. They're kind of self-evident, especially with a visual list here. But they also are something that animators take years to internalize. So if you don't get them right off the bat, you are fine. But one of the things that I want to talk about here is production. Pre-production specifically, because I have a lot of students in workshop, they're coming to me with a problem, and I look at the problem, and I'll ask them one or two questions that they should have figured out 3 months before they came to talk to me, and they did not. So there's a lot of things that animation needs to get out of pre-production. But because it's kind of farther along the pipeline, you need it after you have the character model and the character rig and all of this, that, and the other. People forget about it. And they don't really know what they're doing once they get there. So use pre-production. Pre-production is important to all stages for all disciplines. Animation is no different. And art and animation, very different to plan for than design. Very different to plan for than marketing. Every discipline has their own if, ands, or buts about pre-production. Again, much of the following will be true about any discipline, but animation tends to be put on the back burner. Question? It's going to be in the slide. There's a lot of things that people have come up to me and said, I'm going to put this in here. I'll call them out. I won't call out the students. I won't call out the games, but some of the questions that they're going to ask, it'll be self-evidence that they should have talked to someone before they went full force. Please use, this is just in general, side tangent, please use the professors here as a resource for your production games. We are very willing to talk to you if you have a question about how something works or what you need out of something. It's just the way it goes. There's too many of y'all, too little of us to get to everyone and give everyone the beautiful bird little lessons. So it's kind of, heaven has a place for those who pray. I'm just going to be quite honest. Animation software. So there are a bunch of different things to use for animation in games. There is Maya, which y'all should be very familiar with. Maya is very good for rigging and animation. It has a very robust toolkit for that. Blender has a very robust modeling and sculpting and motion graphics sort of pipeline for that. It's okay for animation. There's a lot of things that Blender does really well that cannot work with Unity and Unreal. You'll do something really cool for Blender, and then you try to export it and put it into Unreal or Unity or all that, and it dies. So you have to know what the capabilities are. I would essentially say, unless you are very good at Blender animation, I would use Maya for animation in your stuff, because one, I'm just more comfortable with Maya. I've been using Blender a little bit, but I can diagnose what your problem is. But if you're using motion capture and the studio is right down the hall, use Motion Builder. Has anyone even heard of Motion Builder before? Okay, good amount of people. Some of you might have been talking to me. Still have this cough. Motion Builder is a older, kind of crustier Autodesk program, but it is purpose built to clean and capture motion capture data. So there's a lot of things where you can kind of work it with Maya if you know these, that, or the others, and you know how it works. Versus Motion Builder, it just works. It's very good. But then there's 2D. This one, Spine. Spine 2D Anim for games. Spine is a program that you may or may not have access to. I don't know. I've touched it a little, not the best at it, but it is a 2D specific animation program for games. So if you want to do 2D, there are options. So now we need to know the how. I just went over a lot of the tools. You need to know what your tools are. You need to know their capabilities. You kind of need to know what your style is, and you need to know its capabilities. If you're using motion capture, Mobu and Maya are the way to go. But is Motion Builder the right tool? Is motion capture the right tool? Is that what you want? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. What game engine are you going to use? Is it going to be Unreal or Unity? Both of them have their own suite of animation tools, their own pipelines, the own thing that they really like. And I don't even know about Godot. Some of you might want to use Godot. I don't know about that. But sometimes that might be the game for you. In pre-production, if you have an animator who's just sitting on their hands and they're not really animating, it doesn't mean that they don't have work to do. They can be investigating these tools. They can be trying to get a pipeline going. They can try to be getting comfortable and giving y'all the data that you need later down the road. What is the stages from going from an idea to a final result? How do you export a thing from one program into another? Is there something that you could use for this, that, or the other? Or, hey, we want to use this, that's not going to work. Those are the things that you can have your animators do. You can also just kind of have them like time them. It's like, hey, I'm going to do a walk cycle. It's going to take me like 2 days to do a walk cycle here. All right, cool. We now have that data to budget in, and we can essentially create a schedule for our stuff rather than just saying, hey, I need it done by Friday. And they give you something that's not great because they're not to that level yet, or they had other stuff to do that they didn't budget their time for. But a thing that you must do, and this is not just an animation thing, this is a absolute just art thing, is you need to set parameters. So this video is, I think for a level designer, what they did was they were designing their character animator, and they're setting the parameters of what they need for the environment. Hey, we need a low ceiling. How low is the ceiling going to be? Hey, we have a climbing animation and a climbing mechanic. How tall do the walls need to be for us to climb? How low does the low cover need to be? All of that. You need to set all these parameters in your design. And if you can kind of see, the animation is interacting with that. It's interacting with how high the person can jump, how low they have to like walk to crawl through a vent, all of these sort of things. You need to get these parameters. How far, like, okay. If I was going to make a walk cycle, I need to know how far will it go? How long will the animation be? How fast is the walk? How and what are the other animations going to be using this walk cycle? How are they going to be working in the environment? One of the games in Workshop right now is a game called Real Run. It's essentially a Sonic-like. I'm not going to design my walk cycle or my run cycle for a Sonic-like versus When the Crow Sings, which is this narrative-heavy adventure game. They're going to require two different animation sets, and I need to know what those parameters I'm working with. Prototyping. Prototyping is very, very, very important. When you're planning an animation, something as simple as a drawing, as a picture of an action figure, or you just acting like an idiot in front of the camera is great. Animation prototypes really help define what you want out of a animation. Define the posing, define the timing, define the silhouette of the action, how it would interact with existing constraints. Sometimes the final product will change, sometimes it won't make it, but you can start to figure these problems out just with prototyping. And you don't need to do big animations. Let's go back up. This is from a Sakurai video that I'm going to show in the next slide. These are really well-defined sketches from Street Fighter 3, and you can kind of see they changed it a little bit here. This is the storyboard for a fatality in Mortal Kombat. They're not the best at like drawings, but I get the idea exactly. There's a whole thing when it comes to animating and just design. So let's say with this animation, it's like, all right, character's going to do a kick. What type of kick? With what leg? How is this kick going to play with everything else? Is it from a neutral stance? Is it from a ready stance? Once they kick, are they going to kick again? Do you want it a roundhouse kick, a front kick? Do I need to look at Taekwondo? Do I need to look at Muay Thai? Am I just going to be some drunken brawl kick? I don't know. I need to know what it is. Sometimes a kick is a kick is a kick. Sometimes a kick is a discrete thing I need to know about. It's not just the action. It's not just the prototyping like poses. Sometimes it's also the emotion. There is a game that's in Workshop that I was helping out with the animation on, and it's like, all right, here's the character's idle, and it's just ramrod stiff. And I just asked the question, what is the character thinking right now? What is the tone of your game? And the animator looked at me and said, I don't know. And I said, that's bad. Go ask your designer, go ask your creative director, what is this character supposed to be doing? And then went back and we figured it out. Reference and production. Please, for the love of God, use reference. It doesn't matter if I can see what you are looking at, what you're shouting out, and it's like, oh, I'm not original enough. Who cares? It's hard to do something. I need to know what you're trying to hit. If you come to me with a animation and it doesn't look right, I'm going to ask you, what are you looking at to try to make this work? It could be, again, a Sakurai video where he gets out a little toy and he just does little poses. That's all he does. And he gives these to his animation team. And it kind of tells you, hey, I want it to be this timing, I need it to hit this sort of vibe. He gives little drawings, little notes, all of that. It's very clear for me as an animator to know exactly what you want from me. It's exactly where I took that from because it's a really good one. With reference, hey, where is it? Come on. Literally just finding a video. Oh, damn it. Sorry, Skitty Animates, thank you for your service, but I don't need to know your spiel. Literally just taking a video. It could be a random video off of YouTube. It could be some funny thing you saw on TikTok and say, hey, I want the dance to look like this. And then I'd go in and essentially digitally trace over it in order to get a vague idea, and then I'll make adjustments when it's like, hey, we need it to be this quick. Hey, we need to exaggerate here and there. But I need to start with something. I need a prototype. You're going to hear me say this a lot. This is not an animation issue. It's a design issue. And because it's a design issue, it's a production issue all the way down. I need a clear design for me to give you a clear animation. And if the animation is out of scope, then the design is out of scope. They are linked. You need to be working together. You need to be friends. Now, when we're talking about production, we have some terms. So, show of hands. Who here knows what a frame is when it comes to animation? Amazing, great. Spacing. Okay, all right. Key poses. Good. Interpolation. Okay, some people. So, frame, just for the record, it's a unit of time. A lot of stuff is done at 30 frames per second. It may be played at 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second in games. 24 is for film. Spacing is a loose term, but it's how far something will go. Essentially in its sort of animation. If I have something with very tight spacing and it's just kind of moving very cleanly, very evenly, versus the spacing is really far and it's so supposed to move really quick, the spacing of everything on my mouse is going to be different. You need to keep your spacing in mind. There's going to be a lot of things where it's like, hey, this animation isn't work. We need to scrap it. No, just tweak the spacing. Just tweak the frames, all that. Key poses are a phrase back from when animation was primarily on ink and paper. But they're the important drawing, the important thing. I get every single idea I need out of this scene, out of this motion with the key poses. If I'm doing a walk cycle, it's my foot is contacting with the ground, my other foot is passing, the other is passing, and then making contact again. So I can make a walk cycle in like 4 key poses. But there's a lot of things that need to fill the space. This is where interpolation comes in. In digital animation, there's a lot of interpolation that is a programmatic best guess. Back in the traditional days, it was called tweening or in-betweens, because there were the in-between drawings for the key poses. A lot of that can be adjusted in the graph editor. If you are animating and you do not know what the graph editor is, please get acquainted with the graph editor. That is your second home. That is where you're going to go and live for most of your days. But I want to show this. Actually, no, not this one. Let's go here. This
it wasn't
is,
until 2018.
Pre-production footage of how a game looked. The animation and the characters, they are not complete. They are all proxies. You look at the way that the character is jumping, it is one pose. When they're falling down, it is one pose. When they're walk cycling, it's like 3 poses and it's all blocky, uninterpolated. But you want to know what? It works. You can get the idea of what this game is supposed to be. You can start to fiddle around with what the gray box levels are going to be. This is what animators should be doing when you're in the pre-production phase. This is alpha footage of a game. It's not pretty, but it gets the point across. And again, if the design isn't clear or the animation isn't clear, they're not going to work together and it's out of scope. It's all a problem. So let me go back to slideshow. I don't care to whisper, Bob. But we get to another thing. There is a book called Game Animation by Jonathan Cooper. And if there's the 12 principles of animation, there are the 5 fundamentals of game animation. Feel, fluidity, readability, context, and elegance. These feel rather self-evident, don't they? You kind of think you kind of know like what each one is just by like the name of it. It kind of already works. That's one of those things that's really interesting about animation in general. Everyone in this room has been absorbing animation since they were a kid, sitting in front of the TV watching Dora the Explorer. You've been absorbing animation principles and all of that, but now you're using these terms to bring them out, to kind of synthesize them into a complete idea. That's very hard. It takes a long time to do that. If you don't feel like you kind of got it by the end of your workshop game, yeah, I still feel like I don't got it all the time. And I've been doing like game development for like 8 years now. Was a professional for like 4. It's weird. So let's talk about feel. So when it comes to film animation, when it comes to video, sometimes you have this nice, elegant form, all this cool stuff going on. Man, this is great film animation. This is great video animation. If I gave this to my art lead, my animation lead in the industry, he'd throw it back to me and tell me that this is bad because it's not functional. When it comes to game animation, function triumphs form. This is not as cool as this because it's just Sonic just jumping in space. I don't know. There's not all this beautiful squash and stretch and anticipation and arcs and follow through. It's just kind of basic. But you want to know what? This will work. When I put it into an animation state machine, when I put it into Engine, it works. And that's what animations need to do. What counts as good animation may not be good gameplay, but animation serves the needs of gameplay. There's a whole situation about that. Try to square that circle. People spend decades trying to square that circle. Many actions need to react to player input, and timing needs to be carefully considered. This may mean condensing things like anticipation and follow-through of a jump from a few seconds to a few frames. You look at this, Sonic runs up, does this little hop, he bends down, and then he jumps, versus here, like half a second, he's in the air. That's good feel. That would make bad feel. Imagine you're playing Sonic and you press the jump button and then he has to wind up and then launch off. It sucks. But yeah, it may mean completely changing the animation to match the needs of the design, or it may mean design needs to be rethought because it won't work well animated. Again, design and animation linked together. They need to be talking to each other. Please talk to each other. Don't silo yourselves. This goes into a more production thing, but speed and foot sliding. Speed is a parameter you need to figure out, because if it doesn't work, then it's going to be a problem. Foot sliding is something that occurs when the speed of an animation and the speed of the character asset in the engine don't match up. So let's look at Sonic the Hedgehog for another example of bad animation. You might see some of the characters. Hold on, let's look at this character more closely. Are you going to let me full screen it? There we are. See how she's flying around? Are you going to allow me? No, you're not. Damn it. Okay, I don't want to see Big the Cat. Never mind. But if you look at the way a lot of the animation works, when you let's just go back here. Yeah, look at the feet again. They're all sliding around. The speed of the walk is not matching the speed of the character movement. It's a bad thing. People will call it out. It will make your game feel bad. So you need to find the speed, and the speed is the translation of the character in a certain amount of frames. So it could be like, hey, I want this character to move forward 100 meters over the course of a minute. Or in terms of frames, like, I don't know, 100 units over 60 frames. If you don't know what your speed is going to be in terms of design, then animation is flying blind. But let's find an example and go to Maya. I've been working on this animation of an elephant just in my own time. And every time I need an example, I pull it up. So if we play it, you can see the feet are firmly planted. They ain't sliding around. How did I do that? Well, nope. I kind of animated it to a speed. So I have the root here. Let me just save myself some trouble. Oop. From frame 1 to frame 70, it moves 100 units forward in the z-axis. So as a result, everything's firmly planted. I knew what my speed was, and I can move my my feet accordingly. I can plant them where I want, and it's nice. Let's say that didn't work. Let's say instead of 100 units forward, give me a number, high or low? 500? Let's see 500. You see the slide? Doesn't look good. Looks wrong. The speed of my animation and the speed of its movement don't match up. And if you want to see another thing, let's go back. Are we back to? Nope. Let's go back to 100. Animation editor, the graph editor. That movement is also constant. We go from 1 to 100 at a constant rate. Let's see what happens when it's not. Nope. Here we are. Foot sliding all the way around. You don't want that. Animate to a constant rate. Find what that rate's supposed to be. Again, just how far forward is it going to go in, say, a minute? That's the equation. It's kind of simple. It might be a little hard to wrap your head around right now, but once you start doing it, easy to understand. That's just something you just need to tell your animator. All right. So let's go to feel and design. So yeah, feel is great and all, animation's great and all. I love animation. Sometimes you don't need animation. Sometimes animation alone will not sell the design, because it's not about like how good the animation is. Does it feel right? You're trying to get the feel. Animation is only one tool in the toolbox for making your feel. You have things like frame stop, particle effects. They can help sell whatever feel you're trying to do. Camera movement, cinematography, all of this. All of these can essentially sell an animation for a good design, or they can compensate for bad animation. It's really interesting. So let's say, yeah, with this Monster Hunter thing, you see all this stuff. There's all these VFX happening when the sword or the like hits. There's this big stop, bam. The sword hits the ground. The monster hits you, and there's all these dust particles, all these rocks, all these debris. Oh man, it feels nice. Again, they're using multiple things, not just animation. In fact, the most impactful moment is when they're not animating. It's interesting how that works. Another bit is in Mario Kart. Does anyone know what the actual like speed boost you get off of a drift or a mushroom in Mario Kart is? What is it? 15%. That sounds like nothing. But it feels so fast. I'm going so fast. I must be going twice as fast when I hit the mushroom. But how they do that is through a lot of different little things. They're not doing animation. If you kind of look, you have the particles of like the fire coming out of the tires, but you also have the little speed line VFX coming at you. The kind of pull the camera out a little bit, or maybe they pull the camera in a little bit more, so it's like there's just more stuff, more information coming at you. There's a lot of things that happen there. There's a lot of games that were on the Xbox 360 that tried to do sprinting, but the design couldn't account for it, or the technology couldn't. Like, they just couldn't. Like, think... what was it? Dragon Age Inquisition. Your horse and you, same speed. You sprint on the horse, same speed. You're sprinting, same speed. But no, I'm moving so much quicker because they're doing all these things to make it feel like you're moving quicker. It's all weird. I think in Gears of War, where they have the roadie run, where they kind of bring the camera low and they have all this shake. It's like, no, I'm cooking. It's like, no, you're not. You're just kind of just running a little bit. Kind of interesting when that happens. Again, it's all about feel. You're lying to your player to make them feel good. Question? Yeah. Oh, it feels like a greatsword now. Oh, yeah. That's kind of how it works. But yeah, sometimes there might be an animation issue, but it might be something else. You have to kind of figure that out. There's a lot of things how the wires really get crossed. And honestly, if animators should probably be investigating how all these works, designers should be working with animators to kind of get all this work, how all this works. It's a whole weird process. Fluidity. If feel is how well an animation works on its own, fluidity is how animations work together, hiding the seams where one action ends and another action begins. So when I say an animation state machine, does anyone know what I'm talking about? Okay, good for people who raised your hands. People who did not, you're going to learn. You're going to have to learn. So The thing about fluidity is that it's driven by a character's state changing in the engine or in the design. And you have to start to think about what a character's state is. Right now, I'm not moving. And if I put my mug down and I don't gesticulate, I'm in an idle state. But then I can go in and I'm in gesticulating state. I'm talking state. If I start walking, I'm in a moving state. And there's not much different between what a run versus a walk versus a slide is, other than little parameters about the moving state. I'm walking, my it's moving at a low speed. I'm running, moving at a high speed. Sprinting or sliding, moving with an extra thing happening. Oh, Jesus. Thinking about how a character moves, thinking about how moves are in this sort of state-based mindset is how animation works in games. You are going to learn exactly what a animation state machine or blueprint is when you are working in gameplay. Animators, you need to know how this works. Designers, you probably already know how this works kind of intuitively, but you need to kind of figure out a way to figure it all out. Let's go into some terminology. So there are 3 types of state broadly. There's probably some special cases here, but when we're talking about gameplay animation, there's 3. There's the 3 L's: a loop, a link, and a linear. A loop is a state that is constantly playing. We often call them a cycle in animation, like a run cycle, a walk cycle, an idle cycle, whatever. It's a loop. It's looping. It's an idle. It's a standing idle. It's a crouching idle. But then there's a link, where they kind of bridge the gap between one state or another. It's like, hey, we're looping a standing, we're looping a crouch. We need an animation to go between 2 of them. We could kind of leave it up to the interpolation and hope it works, or we can make this linking animation from standing to crouching or crouching to standing. Transitional and link animations are kind of like the missing link. When you kind of make your own animation state machine and things just kind of don't feel right, and I don't know what's happening here, you might not be having your translations or your transitional animations working. So instead of just, oh, I'm idle and then I start moving, oh, I'm in a walking cycle and I'm in a running cycle, have a little transitional animation. I'm idle and then I do this little motion and now I'm walking. And oh, I'm walking and now I'm picking up speed. I'm going to do like the sort of thing and now I'm in a running stuff. Those little, I'm going from here to there, those are your linking animations. That is what separates a bad state machine from a good state machine. And when you go back and you play older games and you're like, I don't know what the feel is like. It doesn't feel as good as the modern ones. That's one of those things that's happening. That's one of those things that's missing. You also have linear animations. They play one specific thing, one action, and then they're done. Such as a kick. I'm standing, I do a kick, and I go back to standing. The kick happened. Maybe I might go into another one. It's like, oh, I can do a kick, and then I can do another kick, and then I can do another kick, but it's one shot. And there might be a thing where it's like, oh, I can go this sort of weird leap, like link loop thing, where it's like, oh, I'm going to do this jumping kick, where I'm doing a standing idle, and then I do this kick, and now I'm in a like jumping in air state, but it's still just a kick. It's weird. This is one of those things that it takes a while to figure out. It takes a while for you to internalize. For the game designers, nouns, verbs, adjectives, does that ring a bell? Does it? I'm actually asking. Cool? Yeah. That's what we're talking about here. When you are writing out a design, it's like, I want the character to jump. You have a verb. That's going to be a mechanic. You have a jumping mechanic. That means you're going to have a jumping animation. That means you're going to have to do all the stuff that involves a jumping animation. Just so it's like, okay, walk. Okay, that's the thing. We're going to have a walking animation. We're going to have a jumping animation. We're going to have to go from walk to jump. It's a whole thing. Now, fluidity in production. Some things are designed and implemented and animated very differently. Kind of going back into what I was just talking about. You write, hey, characters jump. Okay, we're going to have a jumping animation. That is actually a lot more complex than you think, because there's a lot of transitions happening and how you break it up and how you implement it. Because when you're designing something, you don't just design a jump. No, you're in air. You have, I'm going up, I'm rising with like negative velocity. Now I'm being affected by gravity. Now I'm going from like my idle, I'm jumping, to I'm landing. Those are going to be different things. It's kind of interesting how something basic is implemented in this kind of complex way. So this is just a basic jump, but you can see all the transitions, all the loops happening. You'll have a rising state, you'll have a falling state, you'll have a I'm kind of neutrally affected by gravity, but I'm still in the air state. You'll have an idle just on the ground and it's fine, but I'm doing the transition from like on the ground to in the air to in the air to on the ground. And sometimes those are going to have to be completely different animations. This is why designers and animators really need to be talking, and the production needs to be tracking what they're kind of saying, because it's like, oh, jump, basic, one word. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 animations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 states. They all have to be talking to each other. Unreal has this already built in with the Manny skeleton. Honestly, go look at that, pick that apart, figure out how that works, and you'll probably learn a lot. You might also say like, hey man, this kind of sucks. I might want to do this. What are you going to add? What verbs? What nouns? What translations? Ooh, now you're starting to think about it. Question? Yes. So you just asked a very fantastic question that I did not include in this this presentation, but it does. This is Street Fighter. It's on a 2D plane, and that plane does not change. It's very fluid. It's very nice. But if you have multiple planes of height, multiple axes to account for, it starts to balloon. And hey, I can spend like a week on one jumping animation and make it look amazing. But we need like 6 of them because we have like 6 heights. But you still only have a week. And that's where production comes in and polish has to be sacrificed. And you kind of need to know the game you're making before you go in and start to animate. And you have to kind of figure out how that's going to work. Fantastic question. Question. Yeah. So when you are jumping up, you are in essentially a rising state. It's essentially I am in air and I'm being negatively affected by gravity. By negative, I mean like you're going up. And then falling, I am in the air and I am positively affected by gravity by I'm going down. And then like, oh, my idle in air is just, I'm in this sort of threshold of like, not really falling, not really rising. I don't know, I'm at the peak of my jump. But there could be situations where it's like, oh, I'm kind of negatively affected by gravity, but I'm still gonna like be fine, to I'm negatively affected by gravity, but I'm gonna take damage when I hit the ground, to negatively affected by gravity or positively affected by gravity, and I'm gonna fucking die when I hit the ground. Multiple states, multiple things going on. It's all in the design on how that works. When you kind of say, hey, I want this to happen in game, you kind of make a lot more of a ask for design and animation. Sometimes that's what you want. As long as you know what you want to do, you can plan around anything. But if you don't have a clear vision of your design, then animation doesn't have a clear vision of what it needs to do. Or if production doesn't have a clear vision of what's happening, then it's like all the sacrifices need to be made. It's a very interesting conundrum. You just kind of need to figure something out. Root motion. So, when you are making a character move in Engine, you're actually not having the character move around. The root is. In Unreal, if you don't have a root, it starts to yell at you. In Unity, it kind of lets you rock, but it still kind of works in the principle. If you, hold on, let's see if this actually has it. No, this kind of doesn't. But when you actually start making something in an engine, you kind of have this little pill collider. That is what the character is. That is what everything is acting upon. When it's moving, that pill is moving. And however it's moving and all the visual indicators is just feedback for the player. It's visual, look nice for people who are actually playing it. When the character might be moving away from its root, like in this example, the red means bad and bad things might happen. So, will you go? Yeah. Let's go to Maya again. We're looking back at the elephant. So, if we have this here, and everything's kind of moving around, so let's say if we put this into Maya, if we're not in Maya, into Unreal, and then we attach the pill, the elephant to the pill, and we move the elephant forward, but it's still moving forward while the pill is moving forward and the animation is moving forward, things start to break. This character is moving forward twice in one moving forward action. Not only that, you see how it jumps? Loop finished, we're done, it jumps back. That's not good. That would make everything kind of break a little bit. So, the way you kind of get around that, I didn't move this back. Yeah, just gonna, for safety, where is linear? Oop. What I'm gonna do is, I'm just going to find my root here, and I am going to mute selected. It still has the data, but if I play, can you tell where the loop ends and the loop begins? No. It's looping. It's walking in place. So when you put it onto your pill, when you put it onto your character itself in Engine, and then it's moving, it's going to look like the character is walking. When you are making animations, make sure that they are treadmilled in place, unless there's something specific about that you have to change. And sometimes you'll figure that out. Sometimes it's a whole situation. Sometimes if you have a character actually like translating in space, like you have a character doing like this flying kick, and you've designed this specific spacing that it needs to go, you can essentially export the character's root moving underneath the character. So it's like, hey, when we move forward, the root goes, but it's staying with the character. One of the things that's really bad is like, hey, we do this cool action, and then the root and the character weren't selected together, and then it just like whips all the way back, and it looks bad. One of the workshop games that somebody came to me and asked about, it was a root motion problem, because they had a character running in the character animator, but every time they walked forward, they would run away from the root, and then they'd come back, and then away from the root and come back. It was like this weird sort of like whoop, 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 whoop. Bad. Looked bad. So, hey, it's a root motion issue. This is what root motion is. So be aware of it. Be acquainted with it. There's a lot of options in Unreal and Unity to account for it. But also, if you just animate it in Maya so that your final walk animations look like this, treadmilling in the origin, you'll be fine. I don't know. That team was making a third-person action game. And when I asked them to talk to their animator, they said, we don't have one. And I just looked at them and said, why? And they're like, we're using Mixamo. And I'm like, cool. So yeah, they pivoted. But yeah, you get all of those together, and you get a character animator. You get a state machine. And you can really see in this example how the state machine is going. It's taking an input and it's going, hey, if I do this, then I can go into this. If I do that, then I can go into that. If I'm in here, I can go into these states. Bop, 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 bop. You can do it if you kind of understand what's happening, if you can kind of really get everything going. You probably shouldn't be doing a suplex like that. That's probably a little too much for y'all. But you can see what's happening if you kind of understand what you're trying to do with the design, and animation understands how the thing should be implemented. And production kind of says, hey, we need these, and they need to work with this. We have this issue. Again, fluidity is not just an animation issue, it's a design issue, and it's a design issue all the way down, so it becomes a production issue. Good animations need good implementations and designs, and good implementations and designs to shine. I'm not sure if I say it in this one, but if a good animation is implemented badly, it's a bad animation. No ifs, ands, or buts. If a bad animation is implemented and designed well, then it's good animation. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's not about the quality of the actual art, it's how it's being used. Parts of a larger whole. Question? A lot of animation state machines are essentially like node-based visualizations of the code. So it's like, it's one of those things like you have designers and animators who are scared of command lines. You make it in the state machines, and then you have the programmer come and say like, okay, you use a for loop here, you have the clamp here, that's how it works. Or you can just send it in whatever C++ compiler, however you work it. If you have someone who's good enough to do that raw in code, cool. That's awesome. But sometimes, no. Sometimes it's all nodes. But if you can do it, you can do it. A lot of people tend to use node-based stuff because it's more friendly to people who don't know how to code. So it's like, again, oh, I can do it. Well, it's like no one else can do it on your team. So that means only you can do it. That's a massive production bottleneck. So we're not doing it that way. Sorry. Question? So let me go here. Let me look at this rig. Let me show you what's happening with this rig. So the top controller and the top joint of the skeleton is the root. That's what Unreal reads for the position of the character. So right now, I have this elephant animated with root motion in mind. But let's say I didn't do that. Let's say the root is going to stay there. So I'm just going to move everything on its own. I can animate it with having the root here while moving the character's bodies and hips and feet away from the root. I can totally do that. But then as soon as I try to put it into engine and the root is staying put, but the character is moving around away from the root, it becomes a problem because it's just not going to work with the rest of the design. Does that make sense? Yeah. 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 It's a whole situation. Imagine like you have a car and it's like, all right, I'm going to hit the gas, and just you move away from like the actual car itself because like, oh, you're moving, but the car's not. You need to be on top of each other and moving together. It's a whole situation. Or like the chassis is moving, but the wheels aren't. Question, comment? A lot of stuff, there's a lot of workflows about that. One of the things is sometimes it's like actually like baked in. So when you're doing motion capture, you want to be on the origin when you start. There's usually a bit of tape somewhere that says, here's the 0 of 0 of 0. You start here and then you move. And then when you're going to clean it up and it's like, oh, I'm moving away from the root. No, you don't. I'm moving you right on top of the root and you're not moving from there as I clean you up. And sometimes if you are, all right, cool, you can move, and then I'll put the root underneath you and it'll follow you. It's a whole weirdo thing that I don't think I have time to go into because I have to go through a lot of stuff. I did a whole motion capture cleanup thing that's on the GDK YouTube. But if you need more, come talk to me about that because I did a lot of motion capture in the industry. Okay, so we talked about fluidity. Let's talk about, come on, let's go. Readability. Coolio. Oh, hold on. Need to readability. So with 12 principles of animation, there's a couple of principles like, hey, staging, anticipation, follow through. A lot of those can't be done because they're at the mercy of gameplay. I can't really stage something when the player character has free reign over themselves. I can't really do a lot of anticipation where I can't anticipate what the player character wants to do, when they want to jump and how they want to jump. And sometimes if they don't have command, they don't like it. It feels bad design. It's a whole situation. There's a lot of animation principles that are at the mercy of just gameplay and player input. So you kind of combine them and you think about readability instead. Essentially, actions need to be read by the player. When you are just animating in general, an action or an animation needs to be read by the audience. And it's a whole thing that happens from an artistic and design perspective. Hey, I need the players to be doing this. Hey, we did this thing. Well, did they notice that? Did they read that they were doing that? No? Well, they need to understand what's happening. Sorry. I used God of War here because both of them have very interesting camera trickery going on. God of War on the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 had this camera that kind of the player just didn't control. It was on like a dolly that was just like following where Kratos was, but the player didn't control the angle. But they needed to make sure that the player knew exactly what was happening. Where was Kratos? Where was his attacks going? All of that. And you can kind of see they had all these big VFX on a chain. When he's doing this big power slam, hold on, there it is. It like, he winds up, it kind of slows down, and you see it kind of hold for a second. All that kind of stuff. It needs to be read. In the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 games, Ragnarok and God of War, Dad of Boy, it's always behind Kratos. It's a single tracking shot the entire game that does not break. It's kind of interesting. But they need to also see what's happening with the chains, the blades, doing all their ballerina VFX cluster. So they have to really account for the readability of all of that. And you can kind of see they're doing a lot of things with anticipation. It's like, oh, we're going to slow down before we go crazy. We can see exactly where Kratos is despite all the VFX happening. Oh, the VFX means damage. I read that as the player. If something's in the path of that, they're going to take damage. Readability, it's a design issue, it's an animation issue, production issue, all the way down. Come on. Okay. So talking about that with the camera angles are important. You need to know what camera angle you are designing your game for. I need to know what camera angle I'm designing my animations for. I will not animate something in third person as I would in first person, or in isometric top down, or in side view. There's all these different ways on how it all kind of works. If you kind of look at like League of Legends, it's isometric top down. The way the characters are animated is funky because they need to be read from that top down perspective. You'll have a character who's like just doing a breath animation and it's like they are like bending down, they're huffing their chest, they're throwing their head back, so you can see that the characters are breathing when they are taking up 10%, like 5% of the screen real estate, and they're super tiny because they need to be read that way. For first person animation, you probably don't even have a body. You just have arms and they're using the guns, and all of those little things that they're doing with their hands needs to be read. When you have third person free camera, you kind of have an issue where it's like, hey, I need these things to be read from any angle, and there are certain angles that are bad, especially when you have a character from behind the back a lot. If you're just having a very linear angle, such as like this just on the forwards axis, and they're just moving on that one angle, it's not going to read well. If I'm doing this chop on this arc on the side, that's cool, but it's going to read from the back as just this. What am I doing? It's weird. Versus here, you can see exactly what's happening. You kind of need to find a way to break it. In that one, you might go from like one corner to another, like from your right shoulder to your left hip, and you can create that sort of break of an axis. It's very, very important to try to do that. But yeah. It's one of those things where some animations won't be realistic, but they will be easier to read. This is one of those things where it's like, oh, it needs to be realistic, and it looks like that. Realism sucks. We're making a game. Readability and design. So, going to Street Fighter. At the core conceit of a fighting game or a thing like Street Fighter, it's you hit the character and you don't want to get hit. That's the core of it. So, hey, if you throw an attack and you hit them, you need to read that you hit them. And you have all of these animations where they get hit, and there's all these different types of hit animations to show you what type of thing you hit them on. Did you hit them with the big thing? They throw themselves back. If it's a small one, they just kind of go, ugh, and it's fine. All of this kind of works with sound as well, because when you hit them, you get this nice big smack. It's nice. But sometimes, oh, did they block? Well, they do their blocking animation that is so much different from the hit animation, and it reads that way. And usually you get a nice little block, sort of like, oh, low thud, didn't do much. The feedback from that noise and that animation means I didn't get what I wanted out of that attack. They blocked it. Oh no. Or, hey, I blocked it. I got that nice little thud. Cool. I didn't get hit. Nice. But then there's in Street Fighter 3, there's a parry, which is this super block that you can do all these things. I need to make sure that the parry animation and the block animation are completely different so that me, as the person who did the parry, knows exactly what happened. Now I can plan my next attack. Now I'm good. I know exactly what I did. I did it cool, and there's this nice little cymbal crash sort of like sound effect that goes with it, some VFX too. It's cool. I know, hey, I did the parry, I blocked it, I did the cool thing, I got rewarded for it. The design is readable, the animation is helping the design work. Another thing, overlapping action and follow through. This is a readability thing, but it's also a fluidity thing. Essentially, it's the way objects flow. Myself, I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt open over a t-shirt. It's my usual uniform here. When I move, it takes a little bit for my shirt to stop and follow through with that. You have this example where you have this character's hair as they're jumping. It's following the arc. It's very readable where they're going. With this example, hey, the character is doing these chops, these uppercuts and all of that. You have these particles doing some follow through where it's like, oh, that's really powerful. And you can kind of see like where the area that is being affected in. It's reading, hey, this is where they're going. This is what is being affected. If you have a sword slash in a game, you'll probably see like this big, wide, like chunk, this wedge, this smear that shows you, hey, this is the hitbox. That is what overlapping action follow through often does. It's like, where am I going? What happened? What is being affected by what? Excuse me. That's something that's very important to animation. It's very important to design, but it's often kind of difficult to set up because you need to go through all these things with like joint chains to create something that follows like a cape or some long hair or something, or VFX in the case of this sort of stuff. But they help sell the animation a lot more than if they didn't have it. And if they don't have it, you're going to have to find different ways to compensate. Yeah. Thing is, a lot of this stuff, it's more than just the characters. It's more than just stuff for characters. You can use cloth sim and bone physics to create really cool stuff in the environment. Flags, awnings, curtains, and you can have characters interact with them in order to make the world feel more alive. You can have VFX like fire and smoke and embers in an environment so that, hey, there's more stuff happening here. Draw the eye to a certain place in the environment through this motion. There's a lot of things, hey, animation is really cool for characters, but there's also stuff you can do for the environment. So,
today,
context. So, play Breath of the Wild, there's a lot of states that exist in the world itself. Is it hot? Is it cold? Does Link have high health? Does he have low health? Is it day? Is it night? You're going to have all these different contexts for the world, and Link will react to them. Or in a game like Resident Evil, hey, are you at high health? Are you at low health? Those contexts are important. Let's give them an animation. So the context is essentially when and where and why an animation is being used. Again, this is a state machine fluidity thing, but for the broader stuff. So knowing where and why an animation is going to be used is very, very good. You kind of need to know how that's going to work. Come on. It's also really good to know, hey, what is this animation going to be doing? If I'm doing an attack animation, I'm doing a kick, what type of kick am I doing? What are you trying to do? What is the context of this kick? You can say, I don't know, it's a kick, or hey, this is meant to be a poke at a safe distance. But like for balance reasons, I don't want it to hit someone who's crouching. So that's kind of what we want. So, all right, I'll animate that differently. I know, hey, I have to make it kind of slower on recovery, but kind of quick. Or, hey, what's this kick? It's meant to like hop over an attack. It's kind of meant to be slow, but after you're done, it's kind of quick to recover. Okay, I know that's the context. So I'll animate to that. A lot of this goes back to prototyping. A lot of this goes back to, hey, this is what we want, these poses, these parameters that we set. Here's the context of what you're doing for this animation. And I'll go, great, I'll get right on it. And because I don't have to ask all these questions, I don't have to fumble in the dark, I know exactly what I'm doing. I can do that a lot quicker than just, hey man, it's a kick. But yeah. There's a whole thing with fighting games. They have a concept called frame data, where any action has a startup, a point when it's active, and a point when it's recovering. It's kind of like follow through or whatever. Knowing how those work will make my animation better because I can time it to that. I'm trying to find the timing. I'm trying to get the spacing because I know what the context is. One of those things about context is that, hey, players change the context all the time. Sometimes there's too many contexts to keep track of. Sometimes I don't want to do all of that for all of these contexts. I don't want to do a animation with every footstep over every type of terrain. You kind of get into something, a little bit of procedural animation, where you make an animation and it's set up through some sort of system in the engine where it just kind of takes care of it. You have, say, IK feet, where you have a walk cycle, but it'll kind of check when it's hitting the ground, when it's not. You were talking about earlier, hey, the variable heights of something like that. How do you animate to that? Maybe you just animate it to 1, and then you have an IK system that just takes care of, oh, I'm on flat terrain, I'm on rough terrain, I'm going up the stairs, I'm going down the stairs, all of that. Or, hey, we have this situation where we need some banking when you're walking, when you're running, and all of these things are affecting you. All right, just kind of have the walking animation, kind of have this sort of leaning pose or whatever, and just add it on. Or if you have a walk cycle and a character has a weapon out or doesn't have the weapon out, just kind of blend those two together. You have the walk, you have the armed, the unarmed contexts, you just kind of blend them. Procedural animation is something that's very interesting. It's kind of hard to set up, but can be very rewarding once you do. I saw a question. Oh, you're talking about punch lasers? Punch lasers? Yeah, so if you don't know, in the Naughty Dog games, like Uncharted and Last of Us, whenever the characters are throwing a punch, there's this sort of ray cast that's happening where it's trying to find something in the area. And if it doesn't, oh, it's just a punch. But if it does, it's like, oh, I throw out the punch, and then, oh, I notice that there's this bottle here. I'll pick up that bottle, and then my next punch will be a swing with the bottle. It'll be a weapon swing. Or I do a punch, and that's just enough to kind of like finish the dude off, instead of just like, oh, I punch and it's like we're done. I'll grab him and then I'll throw him into the wall or something like that. Setting that up is complex. Pulling it off is very rewarding. This is where, like, again, design and animation get synced up, and you probably have someone who's doing some weird leap code shit in the background, and you can create something very, very fluid. Again, art and design and like even programming here, they're not siloed off, they're linked. And as a result, it's a production issue all the way down, all that. Learning how this all works it's a lot. I do not have time to go over this. I'm scratching the surface of this. People who are like 20-year veterans are trying to figure out wild stuff. Question.
For the first kinematics, Maya has like machine like
Mhm.
but then for elephants and other wood like animals,
Mhm.
do they have set them down?
So You just hit on something that I'm not sure you're aware of, is that there's a lot of terminology that overlaps. Human IK does often not have anything to do with actual inverse kinematics. So it's a whole situation. Yeah, it's just named IK. But you're also kind of talking about something else, is that there's a lot of well-worn pipelines for like bipeds and some stuff for quadrupeds. When you start to branch out from those, things kind of get funky, and there's a lot of stuff that will kind of break. I will talk about that later on, because I have a slide about what you kind of should and shouldn't be doing because of how difficult it is. And quadrupeds are on that list. One thing about context and fluidity and all of this, what it doesn't see won't hurt it. This makes no sense when you're seeing it side on, but in the game, there's all these camera cuts. There's all these things obscuring all of it, and there's all these VFX happening. It's all super interesting. If you are interested on how like all of this kind of works, definitely like look at some boundary break animations, and you can see where the seams are. But yeah, these are the Street Fighter 6 critical art animations. But yeah, they look funky. And you can kind of see, if you're familiar, it's like how it all kind of works. But yeah. But that's also one of the things that like just happened, where it's like, oh, this character is doing this, like falling from a great height, but there's not that much of a great height. Oh, they drop and then they come back up and then they drop again, and there's like a camera cut. So it's like, oh, they're dropping like 5 stories in a 2-story building. It's funky. But yeah. And this also goes to show, it's like VFX and animation, there's all these things that they're kind of doing when working in concert. All right. Come on. Okay, yeah. This also goes to say, hey, real-time gameplay and pre-rendered graphics, they're not the same. Videos are not gameplay. Some things that you would look up and figure out how to do in Maya, and it's like, oh man, we're going to do this cool squash and stretch thing, and it's going to be all nice and cool, and then you put it into Engine and it breaks. You might do something really cool for some sort of thing that you're going to want to do. It's like, oh, this will be a great shot, but it's not going to work in gameplay because the camera isn't there. You might have this really cool heavy rig for very like intricate and subtle character acting, but the camera isn't going to be looking at the face, so that's just a resource load that you're wasting. You kind of need to know what you're doing and where it's going to go. I will say, I'm sorry, Blender people, y'all are the worst at this, because a lot of things that come up, it's like, hey, I did this really cool thing. Oh man, why isn't it working in Engine? Well, because you're using nodes that aren't in Engine, and they don't exist in Engine, so you're trying to do something that you can't do. And you wasted 3 months on it because you wouldn't come and talk to me before Christmas break. Again, yeah, no, I'm dead serious. If you have a question, please come talk to me. And like a 10-minute conversation will probably save you hours worth of works. 1 hour conversation will probably save you a month's worth of pain. Just please reach out. But yeah. Another thing for context and production: distinction versus homogeneity. It's important to consider how unique an animation will be. There's a whole thing where it's like, hey, we want to have this character do this thing that's really funky and really cool. And then your producer will say, how long is that going to be? It's going to be like 2 weeks to do it. How much are we going to use it? We're going to be using it for 2 seconds. No, we're not doing that. If we're going to be spending 2 weeks on an animation like that, we're going to be seeing it everywhere. Or it's going to be the biggest pop imaginable, and we are working towards this pop the entire time. It would be great if everything can have their own bespoke animations, but that is a resource drain. It's going to cost a lot. So sometimes you might want to say make something much more homogeneous, something that's going to be reused all the time. If you have 30 different thugs in the Batman games, they're going to be using the same animations. But Batman can use his own animations because he's Batman. So he has his own stuff going on, and you want him to be special and distinct from the thug enemies. This also goes into an interesting thing. So in the Batman games, you have all these slick takedowns. You have all these really cool ways where he's like countering, he's grabbing the hand, and then he's like punching the character in the back of the head before he does a pirouette off of him and then like breaks someone's jaw with his pelvis. That could all work because a lot of the rigs, a lot of the characters have the same proportions and the same skeleton, and all the animations are using the same assets. Now, those assets can be shoved into this character model to that character model. We can bolt on this to that, but they're all using the same stuff. So we can do a lot of really cool things. I'm just going to use an example. Who here plays Mortal Kombat? So there is a character in one of the older Mortal Kombat games called Motaro, who is this centaur. They took him out because all of the X-rays and fatalities would not work on a centaur build, and they didn't want to deal with that. It was too distinct. So they didn't want to deal with it. And when they brought him back, they made him a Minotaur, and it's like, what's the point? He was a cool centaur. Yeah. So that's a whole thing about design. It's like, if you're going to do the design, hey, can we reuse a rig for that? Can we just put it on the standard human IK rig? Yeah, cool, go for it. Can we do it? No, we have to make our own thing. We're not doing that. Or it's like, yeah, we're going to do it on our own thing, but we're going to repeat it a whole bunch, and we have this asset to be used everywhere. Cool, do it. Question? Hold on, because that's later on. That's later on. I've thought very long and hard about this. This brings us to elegance, efficiency, modularity, bang for your buck. If you're familiar with elegant design, where it's like, hey, we want one mechanic to be used in multiple situations, you can do that same thing with animation. It can be used in multiple contexts. It can be used on multiple characters. It can be standard across the board. This is the same dance animation on all of the Phantom Thieves. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like, I'm not sure if like Futaba's hair is like clipping through because they didn't account for that. They didn't account for Morgana's proportions, but on most of it, it works. Some minor tweaks here and there, but like it works. Why make 100 animations when you can make 5 animations do 100 things? One of the last things I was doing at Blind Squirrel was I was working on New World, and we had a bunch of animations to go through. We wanted a bunch of characters. We could not afford to make a bunch of characters. So why didn't we just make 5 archetypes? We had the brute, we had the tank, we had the ninja, we had the caster, and they would all share this one animation set. They would all share a similar rig and proportion ideal, and then we would just move them on one or another. And it's like, okay, this caster will have the same caster animations as the others. They'll die the same, but we might have this one interesting mechanic that they do that they're going to get their own animation. All of the tanks will move the same because they're all going to be the same sort of burly, brawny build, and it'll kind of be the same. Ninjas will move the same, but then we can figure out little things that we want to do. That's something that a lot of people do when it comes to production. That's a production-focused approach to a big animation questions. We have too many animations to go through. Bunch them up. make them more elegant so we can use them in a variety of situations. This also works with, hey, fighting games. I love me and my fighting games, and hey, you like a fireball and uppercut? I do. Now, you can do a lot of palette swaps, head swaps, model swaps. You can just adjust the timing of certain things. Like you can see the difference between Ryu and Ken, Akuma and Sean in their idols. They're all kind of different. Hey, we need a bunch of different Hadokens because Ryu does a lot of different Hadokens. Well, there's the basic one. Well, what if we kind of tweak something? We add some extra VFX, we hold a pose here, we add some shake there. We just took this one animation and we made an entire new move. It may feel cheap, but hey, it works. A lot of this sort of stuff is when you make animations more elegant, you give designers more toys to play with. And it's like, hey, the designer needs to do something. It's like, well, here's all the toys. He can play with this and that and the other and make new content. But yeah, sometimes one asset can be used in a wildly different context, and it's kind of fun. So, yeah. Here's another thing. Interactable objects. A player is going to pick them up. How are they going to pick them up? This is an animation nightmare, especially in Red Dead Redemption, where they give a bespoke animation to everything, and it makes me want to die because, hey, I don't want to see this beautiful animation of my cowboy picking up all these flowers and skinning this animal. Sometimes I just want to like press on it and be done. But sometimes I want to be more in the moment. So it's all really kind of trying to figure out how you're going to do it. The way Skyrim does it, the way games like that, you're not actively interacting with the objects. You're not touching them. You just kind of look at them and they move telekinetically, and it's fine. It's fine. It's kind of janky, but it's fine. And you click on them to add them to your inventory. There's a little sound effect because, oh, that's a glass material. I picked it up. Cool. Sometimes you're playing an RPG and the character says, oh, thank you for helping me, for your trouble. And they just kind of gesture below the camera, and your character gestures and like says like, oh, thank you for that. And you don't actually see what's being passed. And that's really great when they just do this and they give you a full suit of armor and like 100 arrows and like 20 potions. It's great. But sometimes, again, it's more interesting. It's more baked into the gameplay. Like The Last of Us has this sort of game flavor about scrounging and putting everything together. And it's all kind of supposed to happen in real time while you're dealing with everything because like, ooh, I found this thing. I can use that for the clicker. And they kind of just hover their hands over everything, and all the little interactable objects go into your inventory. It works. Something like, say, L.A. Noire, which is just about getting to this bespoke nightmare, they standardize the sizes of things. So it's like, hey, nothing is going to be grabbed with two hands and investigated. It's something that you can fit in one hand. It might be a coffee mug, and they'll use the coffee mug animations. It might be a letter, and they'll use the letter animations. They're standardizing things in production to save animation's ass and implementation and design's ass on that. It might be kind of boring, but the more you can do that, the more you can fit it in, the better. I'm actually gonna, while I'm here, one of the things that I didn't put in here, but I talked with someone about, is if you're going to have someone pick something up, you might want to make it quick, because you can hide a lot in quick motions rather than in slow, careful motions where you can see all the artifacting versus just like, hey, I picked it up. Oh, cool. He just swiped his hands and he has it now. Awesome. It's kind of what this is about versus this. Elegance and production. Sometimes the best animation is no animation. Hide the seams. Complex animation, complex actions like a transformation can be achieved through, hey, complex animation work. This is bespoke. There's a character in Street Fighter called 12 that can transform into every character. They make a transformation for every single character. That's a lot. They standardize certain aspects of it, but it's still a lot. There are God knows how many Pokemon. You can never catch them all ever again, and they evolve. So how do they do the evolution? Are they going to make a bespoke transformation thing where the character deforms into? No. They're going to go white, they're going to flash, and then there's going to be a VFX something, and then they're going to transform, and you swap out the models when the smoke and mirrors are happening. And it works. Nobody cares. Question? Mm-hmm. 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 So I don't have this example in it, but if you're in, I believe I posted it in the Art for Games Discord with Professor Hunter, where, and this is actually something that I pitched to another workshop team because they were having a thing. It's like, hey, we have this idea. They came to me having this idea, and it was a 30-minute conversation that saved them a month's worth of work because, hey, we have this deer that's going to be like a normal deer, and then it's going to transform into a freak deer. Maybe if we set up this blend shape thing where there's the slider where it kind of transforms in real time. And I said, no, stop right there. You're going to kill yourself doing that. You have the deer do an animation. And you have both the normal deer and the freak deer do that animation. Maybe a little deformation, maybe a little something situational. And then you hide it with a V effect. So say if I don't know, I'm going to do like a clothing change or whatever, I'll reach in and I'll like throw my shirt off and then I'll strike a pose with my new model. But that's two different models doing the same animation, and then the transition happens when you're not looking because something is covering the camera. They could be doing some weirdo bespoke transition animation. They could have a thing where it's like, hey, if you're going to be transitioning from this model to that model, or just any transition, you need to hit this pose. All the characters need to hit this pose, and then we'll hide the transition here and there. I saw a hand.
What you just said, Wonder Woman changing.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, no, there's a bunch of old tech from like the 1930s. Just use that. Just use that. Go back and see what some magician did when Harry Houdini was around, and it probably will work. But yeah, no. Elegance of production. Sometimes the best animation is no animation. Hide it with the VFX, hide the seams. It'll make your life better. It may feel cheap, but you want to know what feels great? Having something finished at the end of the day. Just saying. Now, that brings us to rigging. So rigging is very, very complex. So we've talked about animation stuff. Rigging is a whole different thing. So who here knows rigging? Okay, couple people, yeah. You just need one or two people that know rigging on your team. One person who really knows it and like two or three people that can work with them. Just saying. They're worth their weight in gold in this program. I'm trying to incept it through other stuff. But what is a rig? So rigs are made up of three different things: a digital skeleton, either joints or bones, depending on your program, a character model, geometry or a mesh, depending on what you want to call it, and then a set of controllers and constraints. The bones move the geometry and the controllers move the bones. And there's a lot of complex math that gets really, really funky if you don't set it up right, but once it does, it works. Yeah, I will say, do not animate on just the bones. If you come to me with an animation and you've been boning it, I'm going to be really mad because it's like, no, don't. That's a lot of work. There's a lot of things about rigging. This is when it comes to production. There's a lot of points of no return. I don't want to say it's no return because you totally can return to it. I just don't want to. Once you have the skeleton sort of completed in a way, it's the hierarchy is set, the proportions are set, and we're off to the races. I know what everything's going to go, and it's like, all right, we've done it. Let's start doing something else. And somebody says, we need a change here. And it's like, no. I'm going to start from scratch instead. And do you want me to start from scratch? No. Okay, then we're not doing it. Character topology and proportions. So, hey, if I am making a new character, I can go back to the joint hierarchy step and just slap a new model on it. But if I have a model that is like there, and it's like, all right, we actually need to change this because the rig is there and other thing. No, we're not. We don't want to do it. That's going to be a lot of work. I don't want to do it. Fine. This is one of those things where if the character has like final geometry and then there's like an issue with the way that it's deforming or something, like the joints are all screwed up, that's bad. You need to figure that out before we start to like put the geometry on the skeleton. Because binding the model to the skeleton, hey, rigging people, skin weight painting. Yeah, it sucks. I don't want to do it. Once I do it once, I don't want to do it again. We're not doing that. And then adding controllers to the rig. It's one of those things where it's like, hey, we're going to have this. It's like, hey, we want to add this new controller here and there. It's like, am I going to have to destroy what I got? Yeah, then we're not doing it. Now, there is a whole thing. You could go to these points. Once you're at one of these points, you could go from there and reuse some work. There's nothing stopping you from reusing a skeleton with the joint hierarchy and placement for a new model. There's nothing stopping you from adding something. It's like, oh, we want to add this cape to this character. Oh, I can add something, but I'm not modifying what I already got. That's sort of the trade-off. It's a weird, funky thing with rigging. Rigging and production is its whole situation. So definitely try to investigate that before you go. Let's go here. Rigging in 2D. Probably should have had something the next slide over, but whatever. A lot of stuff when it comes to like, I'm talking about 3D art here, 3D rigs, 3D animation. 2D also has rigs. Puppet pin animation, things like Spine do rigs, After Effects does rigs. If you kind of look at a lot of popular 2D TV shows, like Rick and Morty, all rig animation. It's one of those things, like once you start to see it, you can kind of pick it apart. But hiding those seams, those rigs are really, really good. But it's a lot easier to modify an existing animation on a rig than completely drawing a new frame of animation. Sometimes you want to do that, and sometimes you account for that in production, but if you can do it with a rig, you can do it with a rig. All right. Rigging and implementation. So when it comes to creating a rig, again, we're moving from something like a Maya to a Unreal, to a Unity. A lot of the actual data that is being transferred over is nothing on the model unless it's like some weird blend shape something. A lot of it is just the skeletal data. So if you have an animation and it's on the skeleton, it'll work. If it's not on the skeleton, if it's like on some blend shape or something, you might need to set that up like in its own way in Engine. When you are often exporting stuff from Maya into Unreal, you're often just exporting the bones, just exporting the animation data on the bones. And that's what you're kind of reading into the engine. You'll set up the character with all the skin weight painting once, you'll put that in Engine, and then you'll just put new skeletal animation data onto it, and it'll all work out. So again, if the animation is not on the skeleton, or the skeleton's not complete, it's not going to work. There might be definitely are some caveats to that and like weird use cases, but for the majority, that's going to be what we're working with. One of those things about rigging and skeletal animation is that, again, there's a lot of well-worn pipelines, especially when we're doing generic bipeds. Now, this sometimes doesn't work with some things. Sometimes it does work with others. You kind of have to investigate it. Mixamo, motion capture, and the UE Marketplace assets, they all like this skeleton. If it works with this skeleton, it'll work. If you can just pick Manny's skeleton out of Unreal and then just modify that, like the placement, modify like the model onto it, you can just put it in back into Unreal and it'll work with 99% of the Unreal tools. It's great. Another thing about rigging in production, this is what I was thinking about with the whole points of no return. You don't need finished geometry for a finished rig. You could essentially create a proxy mesh, a proxy model made up of cubes. You can make a more finished one, but sliced up because everything's kind of being worked on and you don't have the final skin weight painting. And just use that. If you have something that the animator can start working with, then they can start animating, they can start making stuff work. One of the things that I did, again, Backup Line Squirrel on New World, the tank wasn't done yet. So I had to do this big burly dude on this petite, like pirate model. That was like half the size of the final character. It was kind of a pain in the ass, but it meant that I was working. And then we can use that and it's like, oh, there's some things here and there that I need to adjust, but we're off to the races. I started working, I was starting making something, and then we're done here. Saw a hand.
For the proxy rig you just the one cube, I guess, for the boat.
Yeah, pretty much. It really depends on where you're at. You can have like this weird cube action going on. Another thing that I've seen is like, say you have something like this, but it's not fully final. So they would like essentially slice it up into non-contiguous pieces. And because it was more final in proportions, but not done yet. And then we'd use that. It all really depends on where you are in the process. It's a thing that once the rubber meets the road, you'll start to fiddle around with it and it'll make a lot of sense. But yeah, use proxy assets where you can. Animate on Manny before like you actually get the final animation if you can, because that means the animators can get going. That means things can get working and then everything's fine. Don't leave animation towards the end because you needed to set everything up. Okay. Rigging props. Who here knows what a socket joint is? Okay. Your props also have a skeleton. They also have joints. Oftentimes they're animated kind of alongside, but exported independently. Or you animate something to a prop and then, hey, we're gonna put this joint here is where you're actually gonna grab it. This joint here is where this VFX is gonna go. If you essentially find the workflow, again, socket joints are a big one, you can essentially just make that all work together. So again, like joints and bones are how things move in Unreal and in Engine, but if things aren't like don't have a bone in it, it's probably not going to move. See a hand? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's getting kind of late. I'm going over time. Let's see if we can speed run this. Motion capture. We're kind of coming to the end of it. So motion capture is a pipeline that tracks movement and captures it into edible data, similar to rotoscope, if you're familiar with 2D. It's a powerful tool. It allows a single animator to magnify their output. It allows them to make a lot of animation really, really quickly. But the animation data created by motion capture can then be used to have the data move the character rigs. but there's all these tools for it. I've kind of been talking about like the human IK skeleton. That's kind of what you need for motion capture to work. If you don't have something set up for motion capture, it'll be a problem. It's very limiting because of those things. It's like, oh, you have to set it up this way. It's very limiting because you don't have access to a studio. We have the studio in the makerspace. Please go use it. You're losing access to that once you graduated. Please engage with it. Motion Builder is a powerful tool that is purpose-built for motion capture. Blender can do mocap. It's just not fun. You need all these plugins. It's not fun. Maya can do it. It's kind of crusty, but Motion Builder works. Many studios build their pipelines for animation around Motion Builder because, hey, it's expensive, but if we can have a team of 10 animators and we can give them stuff that gets them like, I don't know, half of the way there, 30% of the way there, because motion capture, you don't just get the data and you're done. You need to do a lot of stuff to it. But if you can get, like, again, 30% of the way there for 100 animations, that's a production boom. It's more of a thing at scale. Again, there's a lot of cleaning of motion capture data that you need to do. You have all these things. Not everything here is going to go into Engine. Sometimes it's just going to be one take. Sometimes it's going to be sliced up like that jump from earlier. And again, like sometimes, hey, we need to have this character hit the ground and we need to make them look like they actually hit the ground, not a mat. I know some people on WWE, like the WWE games and visual concepts. That's one of the big things that they have to do is, hey, make the wrestling move look like it's doing damage. And it's not like, hey, I'm going to gently slam you down because I don't want to damage like yourself or all the mocap equipment. It's a huge thing. Again, it doesn't replace real animators. It automates it about 30% of the workload. It's not a silver bullet. You also have to essentially create your own pipeline and build it around it. This is expensive. You're not going to do this for like 4 or 5 animations. If you're going into motion capture, you're probably going to go all the way. Just letting you know. All right, come on. And we're done here? Yeah, motion capture is not a silver bullet. Exactly what I just said. Mainly works with humanoids, with realistic proportions. If we look at Sonic the Hedgehog, you kind of look at the way Sonic and Tails move, they look like weird little freaks because people don't have those animations. It's strange. They don't have those proportions and they're animating strangely. There's a whole thing called the mascot suit problem, where you'll have a character moving like they're in a mascot suit because the proportions and in real life and the proportions of the character don't match up. But with a little tender love and care, maybe some hand keying here or there, you can use motion capture to your benefit and make some weird stuff. For the Monster Hunter freaks out there, Rajang has digitigrade feet. He's got arms like the size of his body. Not human. They're not getting the Kieran in there. How are they going to do it? Hey, they're going to make a model Kieran, and they're doing all these weird stuff. It's not 100%, but they're getting a lot of the data, a lot of the things that they need from it. There's also a thing here. Again, Rajang has big, long arms and tiny feet. So they gave him crutches, little stilts to move on. That totally works. Not sure if you saw in the other mocap video, they had a dog earlier. They can do it. You just have to set it up. But sometimes hand keying might be a better option. Sometimes hand keying is going to be the way you do it, and you kind of use it to plus motion capture, or you're going to get all the things that you can't really get out of motion capture out of hand keying. So again, not a silver bullet. You have to build your production pipeline around it, but really cool. And I think Mixamo. I'm not going to go over the Mixamo library. Mixamo is essentially motion capture data. It's essentially animation data. And if you go around and you look at the Mixamo library and you say, hey, I'm going to put this jump on this character and he's all big bodied with super big arms like Rajang, they're going to do all this clipping. They're going to go through the floor. That's where you give it to an animator and say, hey, make this work. And they will, but they need to know how to do it. It's a whole situation involved in that. So, hey, if you want to fiddle with motion capture cleanup, fiddle with Mixamo. Last things last, difficulty. Whole thing about this, animation can be very cool, unlocks a lot of things about your game, but some things are more difficult than others. Sometimes it's an animator's like nightmare to deal with because somebody thought, hey, let's do a quadruped. Don't stick to bipeds. Or you can have someone that's levitating, flying, they have no feet, so that means no foot sliding ever. Anyway, you want to do a lot of squash and stretch. Deformation is really expensive. It's really cool. So yeah, maybe not do all of that. Let's let some VFX cover it. Actions, combat, lip syncing, nah, all these things. Just look at this and kind of see this. Just having an illustration in place of a full character model set up to do all these animations on a screen, one's easier than the other. Here's the best lip sync of all time.
Here today to talk to you about two very important feelings. And those two important feelings are happy and sad.
There's no deformation on the lips.
Oh, hi there, almost. Anyway, I'm here to talk about happy and sad. And the first thing about happy is...
Best lip sync of all time.
Hi-ho, Kermit the Frog.
Good, Kermit. What to do if you have no animators? Sometimes that's a thing that happens. You don't have an animator on your team. There's games like, say, Hitman Go, where you are moving little figurines around. Maybe you have a really good 2D artist, and you can make these little sprites like in Octopath Traveler. Or you can go hard in the paint for procedural animation, where you're just making all these little use cases and they're all blending together. Again, also illustrations for character interactions, all of that. It just works if you kind of put the time in. You can use vehicles instead of characters, all of that. You should really align your productions to the strengths of your team. Straight up. If you want to make this big combat-focused game, and you have no animators, you are going to make a bad combat-focused game. If you have a lot of really cool systems designers and they're doing all these systems things, but you don't really have an animator for it, you can totally work with that. You can make little VFX things happen here. You can essentially make a JRPG. You can make a weird stealth game with not even stealth game, a little turn-based game where you're playing with toys. You can make like a vehicle combat-based game. If you don't have an animator, figure out a game you can make without an animator. If you don't have a level designer, figure out a game you can make without a level designer. It's just the way things go. You have to align what you're making with the people that you have. All right. A little animation goes a long way, but not every game needs animation to take center stage. Sometimes you just add a little on top. And I think that's the end. All right. We are a little over time, but if anyone has a question, I can ask it. If you need to go catch a bus something, go catch a